carapace is the shell on the back. What's the ventral shell? Plastron, so that's the plastron. And one thing just to point out is on the outside here, you can see the horny scutes. So these are keratin. This is part of the epidermis covering it. And when you look at it, you don't see the actual shape of the bones. The scutes do not correspond to the underlying sutures between the bones, so don't get confused between that. Okay. There's a whole another terminology that goes with the scutes. Okay, costal plates. I'm going to skip that for a second. Let's just go to the limbs. So pectoral limb. Okay. So here's the limb girdles for the pectoral limb inside of the rib cage, as we talked about. And there's a big prong that extends dorsally here. So what's that going to be? This big prong that extends dorsally from the shoulder joint, the scapula, because always that's the dorsal part of the shoulder girdle. Okay. So that's pretty easy. But then there's two ventral parts, okay? And this more anterior one is called the acromion, and it's just an extension that connects to the plastron. Okay, so that's this thing here. This more posterior one is the coracoid. Okay, this one here. And because it's a reptile, it's the anterior coracoid. If it was a mammal, it would be the posterior coracoid. So it's a little confusing because it's the back one of these processes, and it's called the anterior coracoid. That's just because it's a reptile, and that is what the coracoid is. So there's the coracoid, there's the scapula. The shoulder joint then is going to be right here at the junction between scapula and coracoid. Okay. Let me see, how am I doing? Oh, what's the cavity where the humerus fits into there, the head of the humerus? The glenoid fossa, exactly, or glenoid cavity. Okay, so then we actually have to deal with the plastron. Okay. Because it turns out that the clavicles, which are a dermal part of the pectoral girdle, are actually fused into the plastron in these guys. And so if you look here, you can see a pair of bones here and here. Okay. Do you see these guys? Okay, so those are the clavicles, okay? But they have a special name in a turtle. They're called the epiplastra. Okay. There's a little median element here that actually I didn't talk to you about before, but right in here, a little triangular guy. And this one here, right in the middle, is called the entoplastron, and it corresponds to a dermal bone that is found in a lot of other tetrapods called the interclavicle that I did not mention. But it's a median element in between the two clavicles. And if you think about a bird with a wishbone, those are the clavicles that come down, but then that little prong on the wishbone is the interclavicle. Okay. All right. So those are the actual dermal pectoral girdle components. But then there are other plates that make up the plastron as well. So these are the epiplastra, then these ones here, these two, make sure I'm looking at the right plates. Yes, okay. These are the hyoplastra, the ziphiplastra, the hypoplastra and the ziphiplastra. Okay, so hyoplastra, hypoplastra, and ziphiplastra. Cool, and that makes up the plastron of these guys. Humerus, kind of got that already. And then we get to the rest of this, which is a little bit tricky. So here's our forelimb that's kind of dangling very sadly. Should be looking, I can get it to hang out correctly, like that. Okay, and So there it goes, and this would be the radius and the ulna. Radius again being the medial element. Okay. So radius and ulna there. Okay. And I'm not going to try to point out all the individual elements, but there's our carpals, our metacarpals, and phalanges. Okay. Carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Okay. And the same thing. That kind of turned. On the hind leg, again, he's a little bit tweaked, but you can see femur here, okay, coming in. So there's the femur. So there's an element that extends up from the femur to contact the shell. So that would be what part of the pelvic girdle? Yeah, that's the ilium. There's an element that extends forward ventrally here. This one would be the pubis, and one that extends posteriorly or backwards, and that's the ischium, yes. Okay, so pubis and ischium. What else did we not done? The acetabulum is the joint, cavity. The symphysis is just the name for this junction where the two halves of the pelvic girdle come together ventrally. That's the symphysis. The epipubic cartilage is the dried, curled thing there, which extends forward from the pubic bones, kind of like we just saw in the nectaris. And, oh, the puboischiatic fenestra is just the big hole here between the pubis and the ischium. So femur, we've got, again, on the hind leg, you kind of have to think about the animal putting its leg out to the side and what's going to be front, what's going to be back. And when you do that, you realize that this here is the leading edge, this is the trailing edge. So what's this element?
Tibias.
Tibia along the front here, and along the back? Fibula. Okay. And then again, we have the ankle bones or tarsals, and then the metatarsals, which are these guys here, and the phalanges are missing off of the skeleton. So it kind of got destroyed. Okay, we're good? All right.